Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. About 75 people gathered at the National Aboriginal Veterans Monument in Ottawa on Friday to mark National Indigenous Veterans Day. APTN's Fraser Needham starts us off tonight.
You can be in the shot.
Colonel Dave Grebstad is with the National Capital Region Defence Indigenous Advisory Group. He explains the importance of having a separate day to honour Indigenous veterans.
Despite their heroism and their contributions to our safety and our security, a lot of our Indigenous veterans who came home from World War I, World War II, were not treated the same as non-Indigenous veterans. They weren't given the same benefits. They weren't treated with the same level of respect, didn't get some of the land grants that were attributed to other non-Indigenous veterans.
Gail Ratty is with a group of Canadian Rangers from the Northwest Territories. They're in Ottawa for Veterans Day ceremonies. The Rangers do search and rescue in remote regions of northern Canada. In some regions, they are considered guardians of Canadian sovereignty. Ratty says the Rangers could lead to a career in the forces.
If you enjoy the land and you it's an honor to be a Canadian Ranger to take part with our patrol. You get to go out and do so much, and you get to, when the army comes up, we get to teach them on the land skills. Yeah, and you get to go out and search and rescues.
Grebstad adds the forces are always working to recruit Indigenous people. Loosening dress code standards is one way of doing this.
We have amended dress regulations in the Canadian Armed Forces to allow Indigenous service members of the uniform force to express themselves and express their culture and heritage, whether it's changes to dress regulations pertaining to the way they wear their hair, or in my case as a Métis, if I wanted to, I could wear the sash every day.
The nation's capital will next hold Remembrance Day ceremonies on Monday. Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
And in Manitoba, a similar ceremony took place in Winnipeg's core. Indigenous Veterans Day also on its way to being officially recognized by the province. With more, here's T.R. Wheatley.
The Honourable Bob Canoe, Premier of Canada, will now lay a wreath on behalf of
dignitaries marched in first, followed by veterans and those still serving. A ceremony to honor First Nations, Métis and Inuit veterans in the heart of Winnipeg, a tradition here since 1994. Justin Woodcock served in the Canadian Forces for nearly a decade. He reflects on why November 8 became a day to recognize Indigenous veterans.
A disrespectful act that happened in 1991 where a group of First Nation veterans attended the National War Memorial Remembrance Day service in Ottawa and were denied their right to place their wreath. They were told to wait until after the ceremony was over.
This year, the Manitoba government introduced a bill to recognize November 8 as Indigenous Veterans Day in the province. It's past second reading.
I was there and it was such an honor.
Betsy Kennedy of War Lake First Nation is acting Grand Chief of the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs. She says the recognition is a long time coming.
And I really thank the Manitoba government for achieving that and acknowledging that, and that we celebrate what our veterans have done, and to recognize that day, and let them know that we think about them every day in our lives.
This ceremony also marking another first. It's the first time any Manitoba Premier has ever attended. Wob Canoe takes the time to reflect on the indifferences of the past.
You think about First Nations people at that time didn't have the right to vote. And so people were there fighting for democracy, even though they had to come back here and work towards getting that right here in our homeland where we live. And so I think that that's just a powerful story for all Canadians to take some time to remember today.
Remembering their contributions and making time for those veterans still alive is something Woodcock now does in his job with the Southern Chiefs organization.
We try and look at all the needs of the First Nation veterans, and we base our program in the medicine wheel with the veteran in the center. So we want to make sure our program is looking at after the spiritual, emotional, physical, and mental well-being of our veterans.
Holding monthly meetings for those living in Winnipeg and a yearly gathering like the one coming up on November 20th, so Indigenous veterans continue to feel the camaraderie they felt with each other when they served this country. T.R. Wheatley, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Over 100 Indigenous veterans from Canada served in the Battle of Hong Kong. However, their legacies and identities were often erased from Canada's military history. Reporter Sierra Benton sat down with the daughter of a Métis veteran to discuss her mission to honor the forgotten Indigenous soldiers.
Pamela Porteous Heinrichs has spent the last few years trying to retrace a fractured history. Through the Hong Kong Veterans Commemorative Association's Indigenous Veterans Project, she and a team of volunteers have identified over 100 Indigenous soldiers who served in the Battle of Hong Kong.
Rather than just the association saying, here's our Indigenous soldiers, I wanted to see how the Indigenous families would benefit from it.
Many of those veterans, like her father, Ferdinand Poitras, a Red River Métis from Winnipeg, hid their identities. In fact, at the time, there was no Métis category. Soldiers were identified as First Nation or by European ethnicities.
The project is special to me in that regard too, because I'm sure there's other families that were the same, that we can now take pride in that.
Ferdinand Poitras enlisted with the Winnipeg Grenadiers in 1939 when he was 19 years old. They were sent to Hong Kong in November 1941.
Britain asked Canada to send regiments just in case Japan attacked the British colony of Hong Kong. And it was apparently never dreamt that that would happen.
But it did happen.
Their army vehicles didn't reach them, all kinds of supplies didn't reach them, and they were greatly outnumbered by the Japanese, who were battle-hardened troops. They had to surrender Christmas Day 1941, and any that didn't survive the battle became prisoners of war.
For the next 3.5 years, Poitras was a prisoner of war in a Japanese-run camp.
My dad was prisoner number 110, and he could still say that number in Japanese right up until his 80s.
264 Canadian POWs died in those camps. In August 1945, the Canadians were liberated after the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki forced Japan to surrender. However, when Poitras and other Métis veterans returned to Canadian soil, they faced another reality. A Veterans Affairs letter dated March 5th, 1946, describes his prospects.
This was the part I found interesting. His background and education placed him in the general laborer class. So they wasn't even thought that they could go on and do anything more.
Poitras died in 2008 at the age of 87. Growing up in Winnipeg, Poitras Heinrich said her father never spoke of being Métis. She began reconnecting at 19 years old, which is the same age her father was when he enlisted. While some Métis veterans hid their identities, others, like Manitoba Métis Federation Minister John Fleury, wore them with pride. But that pride wasn't always accepted.
They either asked you to identify as English or French, and I had a issue with that, so I would cross it out and I'd say I was Métis, and they would say that's unacceptable, you have to respond with the English or French.
Fleury also understands why some Métis hid their indigeneity.
If people could assimilate into the non-Indigenous society, then they would, for the sake of advancement, protection of their families.
In October, Poitras Heinrichs ran a booth on the Indigenous Hong Kong Veterans Project at this year's Manitoba Métis Federation's annual General Assembly.
We had people walk by and say, that's my great-grandfather. And there were some other families that came by that had no idea about the association or about our project and what we were doing, and they were literally in tears at our booth. So moved and grateful for what we're doing for their family member.
Today, Poitras Heinrichs and her children are reclaiming the Métis pride that their father and grandfather wasn't afforded, and with every Indigenous veteran identified, helping other families do the same. Sierra Benton, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Cool story. The Advocacy Cree Nation in Saskatchewan is honoring their homegrown veterans with a war memorial dedicated to their members who fought to protect Canada. Students and community members gathered at the school for the unveiling. Video journalist Rachel May was there.
Again, it's so exciting to share this with our students here, to show them that our First Nations people didn't have to go to war, but they went to war even based on against their treaty rights, but they went to war to save our lands, to save this country, to keep us all safe here.
Attakakoop Cree Nation is honoring their veterans with the unveiling of a cenotaph. Placed in front of the school, it's topped by a pair of boots, a gun, and a helmet. The names of the veterans, along with the wars they fought in, are at the base. Chief Larry Ahenakew said this is a deep symbol of respect, and it honors the country these veterans fought to protect.
Which we share with the rest of Canada. But that's a lot of reasons why a lot of our veterans went to war on behalf of all our First Nations in Canada and our reserves.
Fabian Head was just elected third vice chief of the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations. He says community cenotaphs like this are important to honor the sacrifices made by soldiers.
It's fitting, rightfully so, to honor and to commemorate the soldiers that have went to battle. And yes, we know that some of them never made it home, but here we are standing this day remembering them.
Sean Sisakamoose, principal of the Chief Attakakoop School, says it's important to involve youth in Remembrance Day ceremonies.
And I think our kids need to be really cognizant of that and not take for granted this freedom to be out in the air and not to be scared of bombs falling on us. On the other side of the world, that is happening. And we enjoy that peace and that comfort of life because of what our ancestors did for us.
This cenotaph is the work of Joe Bear of the Achapowace Nation. Rachel May, APTN National News, Saskatoon.
Well, we'd like to hear how you spent your National Indigenous Veterans Day. Here's how you can continue the conversation. If you have a story you want to share, you can send us an email to news@aptn.ca. To read and watch our stories, go to our website. That's aptnnews.ca. You can also find us online on your favorite social media sites, including TikTok, YouTube, LinkedIn, and X. Follow APTN News to join the conversation and see our latest stories. And we will have more from Indigenous Veterans Day later in the show. Also still to come, a sacred fire is burning at this hour for a baby girl whose death remains a mystery. Stay with us. Welcome back. The former caregiver of little Xavia Butler is speaking out about the circumstances prior to the toddler's death. She says Xavia would still be alive if left in her care. Xavia's remains were found in a barn earlier this summer. APTN Sav Jonesa went to the sacred fire held in Xavia's honor.
This sacred fire will continue to burn until November 11th. It's in honor of little Xavia Skye Lynn Butler as she journeys to the spirit world. Her remains were found in a barn roughly 200 kilometers northwest of Winnipeg back in June, but have only recently been identified as Xavia's. Her death is being investigated as a homicide with no charges laid yet.
She was always smiling, and when she would play with teddy bears, she would scream at them, and she would just always be just the happiest, bubbliest. She would only watch Shrek. And she loved Shrek. She never cried. She never made a fuss. She was perfect.
Teddy bears and stuffies will line the steps of Manitoba's legislative building as her former caregiver calls for answers.
I want justice for her. I want her name known.
Her name needs to be known.
I want her face known. I want her story known. I want change.
Natalie Anderson says she is Xavia's rightful mother, having signed a legal agreement with Xavia's biological mom and witnessed by nurses when Xavia was born. Anderson says she named Xavia, picked her up from the hospital, and cared for her until CFS and Xavia's biological mom took her back on March 17th, 2022.
But 2 weeks before she was born, I emailed supervisors and the paralegals from ACFS, making sure that there was going to be no involvement.
Anderson wants to know why the custody agreement wasn't honored and says Xavia would still be alive today if under her care.
The last time I seen her, and I told her that she was going for a car ride, and Mommy would be waiting for her. They had no right to take her. CFS was never once involved the whole time I had her.
Anderson says she will pursue legal action for the custody agreement being breached. She and her supporters hope Xavia's death will bring awareness to missing and murdered Indigenous babies. Those who want to honor Xavia can do so by bringing stuffed animals to the steps of Manitoba's legislative building or by visiting the sacred fire across the street in Memorial Park. Sav Jonesa, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
A Winnipeg teacher, previously charged with voyeurism and a number of other offenses, has now been charged with sexual assault and sexual exploitation of a former student.
In October 2024, Winnipeg Police Service Sex Crimes Unit entered into a sexual exploitation investigation. The survivor in this matter, who is now an adult when reported between May of 2019 and August of 2020. While she was a teenager, she was attending an after-school program within the Seven Oaks School Division. Her student support worker was an adult male who groomed her, resulting in a sexually exploitive relationship.
Police say the 37-year-old Matthew Mousseau was charged in October for allegedly filming children and adults in the family changing room at a local pool. Mousseau worked as a teacher in multiple divisions until May of this year, but is no longer teaching. None of his charges have been tested in court. Coming up after the break, we'll take you to the Indigenous Veterans Day ceremony in Vancouver. But first, in November 2020, Mary Saviuk, a 37-year-old Enoch woman, was allegedly killed by her partner in their home in Salyut, Nunavut, in northern Quebec. Savannah Craig will have this story next week. Here's a preview.
After Saviuk's death, her accused killer has not yet been sentenced. Last Monday, the prosecution suggested a sentence of 12 years, but court was adjourned until December 11th for final sentencing. I asked one of the lawyers involved in the case why the delay in sentencing. She said the Gladue report took a year to be written, citing a shortage of Gladue writers in Nunavut. APTN will be looking into how the shortage of Gladue riders resulted in this delay and how femicides in Quebec increased during the pandemic. In 2020, femicides in the province jumped to 23 murders, up from 13 in 2019. I'm Savannah Craig, and I'll have the story for you next week.
Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. And today's photo comes to us from our very own T.R. Wheatley, a shot of the Indigenous Veterans Day ceremony this morning at the Nigadon Center in Winnipeg. Thanks, T.R. If you have a photo to share, send that photo now to share@aptn.ca for the chance to be our next photo of the day. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the East Coast, showers and 4 in Fredericton, snow and 6 in Halifax. -4 with snow in Kuujjuaq, 2 above in Nain. Sun's out and 7 for Montreal, showers and 3 in Val-d'Or. 8 and sunny skies in Sault Ste. Marie, sun's out and 5 in North Bay. 9 in Thunder Bay and Sioux Lookout, 7 in Kapuskasing. 7 in God's Lake and Norway House, 6 in the Paw. 13 and sunny in Winnipeg and Brandon, 12 for Dauphin. 12 in Regina, 11 in Saskatoon. 8 in Meadow Lake, 4 in Buffalo Narrows. In northern Alberta, -1 in High Level, 2 above in Peace River. 6 with showers in Edmonton, 12 in Lethbridge. Showers in 12 in Vancouver, 9 with rain in Kamloops. 0 in Prince George and Smithers, -4 in Dease Lake. 20 below in Old Crow, -1 in Whitehorse. -10 with snow in Yellowknife, flurries and 12 below in Norman Wells. -22 with snow in Sax Harbor, snow and -11 in Paulatuck. -18 with flurries in Chesterfield and Arviette. -14 and snow in Resolute, 16 below and snow in Joe Haven. With memorials happening across Canada to honor Indigenous Veterans Day, we now go to Vancouver, where APTN's Tina House joins us with a special guest.
Today we honor all Indigenous veterans that fought and died for our freedom in this country. Joining us today is Harriet Prince. Harriet, thank you so much for joining us today.
Glad to be here. It's an honor to be asked to be interviewed by Tina House.
Tell me a little bit about yourself.
I'm a residential school survivor of 13 years and went to 3 residential schools, one in CJ School in Kenora, Ontario, and then in Portage La Prairie and Dauphin, Manitoba. So through all what I went through, I'm still here and very resilient, and it's made me strong. And yeah.
Well, we're very happy that you are still here. What brings you out here today to honor our veterans?
I come here every year to honor our Native veterans and our Chinese comrades also. Yeah.
Now, you have a very famous relative, Tommy Prince. Can you tell me a little bit about Tommy Prince?
Yes, Tommy Prince. I'm not blood related, but I'm related through marriage to him, and yeah, I never got a chance to meet him.
Well, what a legacy he had, being the most decorated First Nation soldier in all of the country. Yes. You also had an uncle that served. Can you tell me a little bit about your uncle?
Yes, my uncle was John Robert Prince, and he was a sniper. He was also in the Korean War. Yes, very proud of them both.
Amazing. It's a great event here behind us. Now, you mentioned that there was a special wreath that was placed here today. Can you tell me more about that?
Yes, I was very happy to have a residential school survivors wreath there. And I think it's the first year they've done that. I'm not sure, but don't quote me on that. And yes, so I got a picture of that too.
That's amazing. Well, it's certainly a day to be proud and to honor our loved ones. What would you like to say to those war vets that are watching today?
Oh, I would like to thank them for the ones that have gone on, for what they gave up their lives so that we can be free here and enjoy our lives here on Mother Earth, and the ones that are still with us this year. Mustn't forget to mention our Chinese comrades also. They're always here every year too. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Harriet. Thank you so much for joining us today. Always nice to see you. Thank you. Back to you in studio.
Thanks, Tina and Harriet. That is all the time we have for your APTN National News on this Indigenous Veterans Day. A reminder that you can tune in for the public memorial service for the Honorable Maurice Sinclair on Sunday. You can find that on our website, aptnnews.ca, or on our APTN News YouTube page. The service gets underway at 3 p.m. Eastern Time this Sunday. I'm Dennis Ward. Marcy Miigwech, thanks for being with us. Have a great night.
Kida, Majo Jistesh, Ich Kokse Yang, Tash Kiji Apetizing, Kan Kida Kawi Tamozing, Onje Apetizing, Ashijis in Dazo Pibonagak, Kiji, Pajijeni Nine, Apish Pang, Ishi Mojish Kisis, Ashijis Kidi.